Ever watched a tiger move through the jungle's frenzy, slithering snakes plot, screaming monkeys demand attention, scavengers stalk weakness, manipulators spin webs, you walk through them, drama erupts, you see the strings. This is the second and last part of the Manipulate the Manipulator series. This is what manipulation looks like from a Zeta lens, and what makes them the most intimidating. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Reality Stone. Most people live in elaborate fictions, comfortable lies they tell themselves and others to maintain social harmony. But you exist as a walking reality check, cutting through their delusions with the precision of a scalpel. Where Sigmas can detect lies and choose when to expose them, you cannot help but see through deception so clearly that pretending to believe it feels physically impossible. It's not that you try to be a human lie detector. You simply exist in a state where truth and falsehood are as distinct as light and darkness. Think about how this plays out. Someone spins an elaborate story about why they're late, when you can see the guilt in their micro-expressions, smell the alcohol on their breath, notice the inconsistencies in their timeline, while others nod politely. You simply say, "You're lying," not accusingly, not emotionally, just as a statement of observable fact. The psychological phenomenon behind this is what researchers call truth bias. Most people have an unconscious tendency to believe others are telling the truth. This bias exists because social cooperation requires a baseline of trust. You don't assume people are lying, but you also don't assume they're truthful every time. Doesn't matter how close they are. You simply process information as data. This creates profound discomfort in others because you reveal how much of social interaction is built on agreed-upon fictions. You don't destroy their illusions out of cruelty, but because operating in fantasy feels like suffocation to you. You need truth like others need air. This makes you both invaluable and terrifying, because people know you'll tell them what they don't want to hear, but badly needs to. Chapter 2. You're the Stoic Sage. Have you ever stood in a room full of people compromising their values and felt like you were watching children trade their souls for candy? That's because you operate from a moral foundation so unshakable that it exposes the flexible ethics around you as pathetic weakness, while others negotiate with their fear of judgment, adjusting their principles based on convenience or profit. You exist as a moral constant in a world of variables. This isn't just intimidating, it's system-breaking. The difference between you and even principled Sigmas is stark. They have strong values they defend. You are the value itself, incarnated into human form. It won't be a mistake if you call yourself a tyrant. When someone tries to corrupt you, they're not just meeting resistance. They're encountering something that makes their very attempt feel like sacrilege. Consider this scenario. Everyone in your workplace cuts corners, lies to customers. They expect you to join the club, to be reasonable, to understand that this is how business works. But you don't just refuse, you make their corruption visible by your very presence. Like a single clean window in a row of dirty ones, you reveal how filthy everything else has become. Lawrence Kohlberg's research on moral development identified that most adults operate at conventional levels, following rules to gain approval or maintain social order, but you function at what he called the post-conventional level, where principles transcend social expectations. You don't follow rules because society says so. You follow an internal code that doesn't bend. This creates what psychologists call moral elevation in some people, but moral intimidation in others. Good people feel inspired by your example. Corrupt people feel threatened because you represent everything they've betrayed about themselves. You don't judge them with words, you judge them by existing. When they offer you money to look the other way, your refusal isn't just a no, it's a mirror reflecting their compromise. This terrifies them because they know they can't break what they can't bend. But beware, rigid ones always breaks in pieces. Chapter 3. The Phantom Who Vanishes Without Explanation. You've mastered something that even Sigmas struggle with, the art of complete detachment without negotiation. You leave without explanation. No string attached, screw feelings. While others agonize over exit strategies, worry about burning bridges, or feel obligated to explain their departures, you simply cease to exist in spaces that no longer serve. No drama, no announcements, no forwarding address. The difference is crucial. Sigmas walk away strategically, often after careful consideration, and sometimes with explanation. You evaporate like morning mist. One day you're there, the next you're not, and the space you occupied feels emptier than it should, as if something essential has been removed from their reality. This isn't ghosting in the modern, petty sense. This is existential withdrawal. When a relationship becomes toxic, you don't fight or negotiate or try to fix it. You simply stop feeding it your presence. When a job becomes soul-crushing, you don't give 2 weeks' notice. You give them the gift of your absence. When a social circle becomes a nest of vipers, you don't expose them. You just stop being available to be bitten. Psychologist John Gottman's research on relationship dissolution shows that most people go through predictable stages: complaint, criticism, contempt, then stonewalling. But you skip all these stages and move directly to what I call quantum absence. You exist in their reality one moment and completely outside it the next. This creates a unique form of psychological terror. They can't fight your absence, can't manipulate what isn't there, can't guilt trip a ghost. They're left with the unsettling realization that their hold on you was always an illusion. You were never trapped, never dependent, never truly invested in their version of reality. The most disturbing part for them is that you don't look back. No regret, no curiosity about what you're missing, no need for closure. You move forward as if that entire chapter of your life was just a brief distraction. Is it ghosting? Yes, but you don't care. Chapter 4. The mind that operates beyond programming. Have you ever watched people react to the same stimulus in predictable ways? Like watching lab rats press buttons for rewards, while you stood there completely unmoved by what drives them insane. That's because your consciousness operates on frequencies that bypass standard human programming entirely. Most people are biological machines running on ancient software: fear of abandonment, need for validation, craving for status, hunger for belonging. But you've somehow transcended these base operating systems that control everyone else. Where Sigmas learn to resist their programming through discipline and self-controlled actions, you appear to have been born without the programming entirely. It's not that you fight your impulses, it's that the impulses that control others simply don't exist in your psychological architecture. This makes you fundamentally alien to the human experience. Consider social media addiction. Billions of people cannot resist the dopamine hit of likes, comments, shares. They refresh endlessly, seeking digital validation, like addicts seeking their next fix. You look at this behavior with the same detached curiosity of an ET looking at tiny humans. Maybe not superior, just completely disconnected from the compulsion that enslaves them. Behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner's research showed how easily human behavior can be modified through intermittent reinforcement schedules. Casinos, social media, relationships all exploit these psychological vulnerabilities. But you exist outside these manipulation matrices entirely. The reward systems that hook others bounce off you like rain off glass. This creates what I call psychological immunity. When someone tries to love bomb you for control, you don't experience the addictive high that makes others crave more. When they withdraw affection as punishment, you don't experience the withdrawal symptoms that make others desperate to return. You observe their manipulation tactics, like watching a magic show where you can see all the tricks. The terrifying realization, for others, is that you're not playing hard to get. You're genuinely not programmed to need what they're offering. Their most powerful weapons of control simply don't register in your consciousness. They're trying to control a being that operates by completely different rules than the ones that govern their reality. Chapter 5. The Strategic Predator Who Dismantles Hierarchies. Have you ever entered a room and immediately identified who holds real power, who's pretending to have power, and exactly how the entire structure could be toppled with surgical precision? That's because you don't just navigate systems, you see through them to their fundamental weaknesses. While alphas climb hierarchies or sigmas silent rebel against them, you study them like an apex predator studies prey, not to destroy for destruction's sake, but because you see artificial power structures as elaborate houses of cards that exist only because no one has bothered to breathe on them. Sigmas often work outside systems, but you see systems as temporary constructs built by temporary people with temporary authority. When a boss tries to intimidate you with their position, you don't see authority, you see someone whose power depends entirely on others agreeing to the illusion, and you've never agreed to that illusion. Think about corporate hierarchies, academic institutions, social pecking orders. Most people either submit to them or rage against them. You do something far more unsettling. You treat them as interesting but ultimately irrelevant games that other people play. You don't just rebel, you see the pyramid flat, and you on the top. When someone pulls rank on you, you respond with the same energy you'd give to a child explaining the rules of their imaginary kingdom. Green's research on power dynamics shows how these structures depend on psychological buy-in from participants. But you've never bought in. You see the CEO as just another human being with human limitations, the politician as just another person seeking validation, the celebrity as just another attention addict. Their constructed importance crumbles in the presence of your genuine indifference. This creates what I call hierarchy dissolution. When you refuse to acknowledge someone's artificial status, you don't just threaten their position, you threaten the entire system that created that position. If enough people saw what you see, these elaborate power structures would collapse overnight. The most terrifying part for those in power is that you're not plotting revolution. You're simply existing in a way that makes their authority feel like children's games. You don't need to attack the system because your very presence reveals how arbitrary and fragile it always was. Chapter 6. The Emotional Void That Devours Manipulation. Have you ever watched someone desperately trying to push your buttons, only to realize you don't have any? Where others carry emotional baggage like open wounds, you exist in a state that transcends the typical human need to feel validated, understood, or even liked. Most people are walking nerve endings, raw and exposed to every slight, every criticism, every attempt at emotional manipulation. They react because they must. Their psyche demands it. But you've evolved beyond that primitive need. The difference between you and even the most disciplined Sigma is this: they build emotional fortresses. You simply don't need them because you've transcended the battlefield entirely. When someone tries to guilt trip you, there's no guilt to trip. When they attempt to shame you, there's no shame to exploit. This isn't numbness. It's something far more unsettling to those who encounter it. Psychologist Paul Ekman's research on emotional expression revealed that humans instinctively seek emotional responses from others to gauge their impact and control, but you provide nothing. No micro-expressions to read, no tells to exploit, no emotional leakage to manipulate. You exist in what I call the emotional void, a state where typical human vulnerabilities simply don't exist. This creates a profound psychological dissonance in others. They expect pushback when they push, expect reaction when they provoke. Instead, they encounter something that feels almost alien, a consciousness that operates by entirely different rules. You don't just resist their emotional manipulation, you make it irrelevant through your very existence. Where Sigmas maintain calm through discipline, you maintain it through genuine indifference to their opinion of you. The manipulator realizes they're not just facing resistance, they're facing irrelevance. Their most potent weapons dissolve against your fundamental nature. You are the predator they never learned to hunt. Chapter 7. the psychological glacier that freezes social games. Do you remember the last time someone tried to play mind games with you, only to find themselves talking to what felt like an iceberg? That's because you operate from a psychological depth that makes their surface-level tactics look like children throwing pebbles at a mountain, while others get caught up in the theater of social dynamics, the endless dance of ego and validation. You observe from a place so removed that their games become transparent, performances you watch without participating. The average person exists in a constant state of social calibration, adjusting their behavior based on others' reactions, seeking approval, avoiding rejection. You've transcended this entirely. Where Sigma strategically navigates social situations, you simply exist beyond. The difference is terrifying to witness. Think about this. When someone insults you, they expect anger. When they ignore you, they expect pursuit. When they threaten you, they expect fear. But you respond to all of these with the same unsettling neutrality, like a glacier responding to the weather. The weather changes, the glacier remains. Robert Cialdini's research on social influence identified 6 key principles that manipulators use: reciprocity, commitment, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity. These work because humans are hardwired for social connection and tribal belonging. But you operate outside these psychological triggers entirely. When they offer fake friendship to manipulate you through liking, you see the calculation. When they create false urgency through scarcity, you remain unmoved. When they appeal to authority, you recognize their need for external validation. You don't just resist these tactics, you make the person employing them feel foolish for trying. This psychological distance isn't antisocial. You've evolved beyond the need for their approval, their inclusion, their opinion. They sense this, and it disturbs them on a primal level, because they're still trapped in games you've already won by refusing to play. Chapter 8: The Desire Destroyer Who Weaponizes Indifference. Have you ever had someone try to seduce you with everything they had, only to watch their confidence crumble as they realized they were performing for an empty theater? You possess something that turns their most potent weapon into background noise, complete immunity to manufactured desire. While others can be controlled through lust, loneliness, or the promise of connection, you exist in a state where these biological drives have been transcended entirely. You don't resist temptation. You're genuinely untempted by what enslaves everyone else. This goes beyond the Sigma's disciplined control over desire. You've evolved past the point where sexual manipulation, romantic blackmail, or emotional seduction even register as attempts at control. When someone tries to weaponize attraction against you, it's like watching someone try to catch smoke with their bare hands. Consider how this plays out. The master manipulator approaches, deploying every technique in their arsenal. They lean close, create intimate moments, promise, passion, threaten withdrawal. They expect hunger, desperation, the frantic energy of someone afraid to lose what they desire. Instead, they encounter something that observes their performance with the detached interest of a researcher studying mating rituals in another species. Helen Fisher's research on romantic attachment identified 3 brain systems: lust, romantic love, and deep attachment. Most people are vulnerable to manipulation through any of these systems, but you operate from a psychological space where these systems either don't exist or function so differently that standard manipulation tactics fail entirely. The seducer realizes they're not being rejected, they're being rendered irrelevant. Rejection implies you considered their offer and found it wanting. Irrelevance means their offer never even registered as something worth considering. They're not competing against your standards, they're competing against your complete lack of need for what they're selling. This creates a unique form of psychological devastation in those who encounter it. Their entire identity often revolves around their ability to create desire in others. When they meet someone genuinely unaffected by their charms, they don't just face rejection, they face existential irrelevance. Chapter 9: The Information Fortress. that processes pure data. Have you ever sat in a meeting where everyone was getting emotional about statistics, swayed by presentations designed to manipulate rather than inform, while you processed the actual data behind their theatrical display? That's because your mind operates like a quantum computer in a world of pocket calculators. While others consume information through filters of emotion, bias, and social pressure, you process raw data with the cold precision of a machine designed for one purpose: extracting truth from noise. The difference between you and even analytically minded sigmas is fundamental. They learn to think critically and question sources. You appear to have been born with an internal firewall that automatically filters manipulation from information. Propaganda bounces off your consciousness like bullets off armor plating. Consider how media manipulation works on people's emotional imagery, loaded language, selective statistics, false urgency. These techniques exploit cognitive biases that make humans vulnerable to persuasion. But your mind doesn't just resist these techniques. It doesn't even recognize them as persuasion attempts. You see them as data corruption that your system automatically quarantines. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman's research on cognitive biases revealed how easily human judgment can be distorted. Confirmation bias, availability heuristic, anchoring effects, all these mental shortcuts that make people easy to mislead. But you process information through what appears to be an entirely different cognitive architecture, one that doesn't rely on these vulnerable shortcuts. When someone presents you with carefully crafted narratives designed to trigger specific responses, you automatically deconstruct them into component parts. What are the claims? What evidence supports them? What's being omitted? Who benefits from this perspective? This isn't conscious effort. It's how your mind naturally operates. The most unsettling part for those trying to influence you is that you don't argue with their propaganda. You simply ignore the persuasion layer and focus on the data underneath. They realize they're not dealing with someone who disagrees with their conclusions, but someone who exists in a completely different epistemological reality where their manipulation techniques simply don't function. Chapter 10. The existential void that consumes all systems. Do you ever look at the elaborate theater of human civilization, all the desperate scrambling for meaning, status, and connection, and feel like you're watching ants build sandcastles? That's because you've achieved something that transcends even the most evolved sigma: complete existential detachment from the human. While others fear death, you've already died to everything that makes most people human. You are the walking embodiment of what philosophers call the void, but instead of being consumed by it, you've become it. This final trait is what makes you fundamentally different from every other personality type. Sigmas detach from society, but remain human. You've detached from humanity itself. Sounds nihilistic, right? Maybe even depressed. But it's a powerhouse. You might not agree yet. We constantly talk about Zetas. They're like an anomaly, neither extrovert nor introvert. They're unpredictable tyrants. You move through the world like a ghost, participating in human activities without any investment in human outcomes. When people encounter you, they sense something that goes beyond intimidating or unsettling. They sense the presence of entropy, itself a force that reminds them how temporary and meaningless their struggles truly are. Your very existence poses questions they're not ready to face. What if nothing matters? What if consciousness itself is just a cosmic accident desperately trying to convince itself it has purpose? Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the abyss that gazes back when you stare into it long enough. Most people flee from that abyss. You've become one with it. This doesn't make you nihilistic or destructive. It makes you something far more terrifying. Genuinely indifferent to whether existence has meaning or not. You don't need hope because you've transcended the need for outcomes. You don't fear death because you've already experienced ego death. You don't seek purpose because you've realized purpose is a human construct that has no bearing on reality itself. This ultimate detachment creates what I call existential terror, They realize they're not just in the presence of someone who can't be controlled, but someone who exists beyond the entire framework that makes control possible. Now watch the first part of this video. Actually, the same traits with the Sigma shoe. Thanks for watching.